The West is still thought of as relatively young, and so the history here is not as rich as it is, say, in the city of Washington, D.C. Growing up in the small town of Rock Springs, Wyoming, I was told what I thought at the time was the entire history of the place. From the railroad, to the Pony Express, to the Chinese massacre, and even the story of the Rock Springs Mafia, of which descendants I graduated with. But there was a big part of the story that I was never taught in school, and I didn't even realize it until I came across an interview with Martin Goicoechea, a man who had fostered an entire community in my hometown of Rock Springs. On October 14th, 1966, the man who would start a car dealership and would later be the lead advocate of an entire culture, Martin Goicoechea, had just left his family's farm in Navarra, the Basque region of Spain, and landed in America to work for 3 years on a sheep farm in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Following in the footsteps of his older brothers, he left behind his large family of 9 siblings and headed for the United States. At home in Spain, he had worked on the farm taking care of the sheep and milking them so that his mother could make cheese, a delicacy in the region. His oldest brother is there to this day tending to the sheep and cattle. Martin, however, wanted to look beyond the mild, wet climate of his coastside village, and after finishing college in Pamplona, ended up falling in love with the big blue skies of Wyoming, where anyone can be anything they want to. While in school in Spain, under the rule of dictator Franco, Martin had been forced to be educated in Spanish rather than the Basque language. The Basque in Spain and France could be compared to the Native Americans we have here in the United States. They were there before the Spanish, but the Spanish moved into their land and took them over. Their culture was especially repressed by dictator Franco. Even then, Martin held on to his rich Basque culture by practicing the Basque language through music as a child, something that would eventually influence his adult life. In the middle of the Spanish dictator trying to repress him, Martin would lock himself in his room and read Basque poetry and sing Basque music. He started reading Basque poetry when he was only 6, started singing by the age of 10, and by the time he was 12 years old, his family really started to recognize his talent. On Sundays, when the people would gather in the church, they would take his family out to eat and offer to pay if he would sing for them. Around the age of 16, he attended his first contest for Bertsolari, or Basque improvisational singing, and poetry. In his first competition, he took 4th place. He was selected to go to the regional tournament, but he had already purchased a plane ticket for America that would leave before the time for the tournament came.
Gertatu zainei, gaur hemen umiltzea. Oiei entzunda ez nuke nahi ni, neron hemen isiltzea. Neri asko gustatutzen zait, Euskal Herrin ibiltzea, baina gauzarik ederrena zen, hemen zuekin biltzea. Baina gauzarik ederrena zen, hemen zuekin biltzea.
At that time, each young man had to serve 2 years in the Spanish army, and those that came from Basque households were given the worst jobs for no pay. Even today, the Spanish government doesn't support Basque communities to the full extent they are capable of. The Basque people don't have any land since it was taken by the Spanish. All they have is their culture, which they hold on to strongly.
Sometimes what Franco did at that time was so wrong, but helped us. Is that when somebody starts fighting you against the wall, forces you to fight back.
Martin escaped from Spain when he came to America. Instead of spending some of his best years fighting for an army that had tried to strip him of his culture, he wanted to come to America, where he could spread his culture. Martin had always dreamed of the freedom he knew he could have in America. His plan was to come to America while the exchange rate was still working in his favor and work for 3 years, saving as much money as he could. Then, he would return to Navarra and start a business. But after an unpleasant vacation home in which he was reminded of how repressed his people were, he returned to the United States, and after 5 years, he became an American citizen. he fell in love with the American way of life. After working for 10 years, he became the foreman of the sheep farm, and due to the ideas he presented, the lambing business he worked for grew over 40%. His success in this business would lead him on to purchase his own. He called around asking all his friends in town about buying a business, when one of his friends gave him word about a butcher who was getting old and wanted to sell his butcher shop. Martin went out to spend one day working for the butcher, and by the end of the week, he bought the butcher shop. From there, he would become a real estate agent. But when the market crashed, he took out a loan of $5,000 from the local Ford Lincoln Mercury owner in Rock Springs. After a couple weeks, he still couldn't pay it back, so he went into the owner and asked if he could work for him to pay it off. On his first day of work, he sold the ugliest green truck they had on the whole lot. The next day, he came in for work, and the manager asked him if he wanted a full-time position, saying, "Whoever can sell that green truck in the first weekend has a future in this business." He worked his way up in the business, and when the owner went to sell his franchise, Martin bought it from him. Over the years, Martin's business, Wyoming Trucks and Cars, is one I have begun to grow very familiar with, because they are one of the first businesses willing to give back to the local community. A local charity organization I work for, Cowboys Against Cancer, receives a donation from them every year. My senior year of high school, Wyoming Trucks and Cars donated a car to the senior class to be raffled off at the all-night party, a non-profit event to keep graduating seniors safe. Martin Goicoechea is always one of the first people willing to give back to the community that gave him so much. When he first moved to Rock Springs, the community was very welcoming, and he would take night classes to start learning English. Eventually, he would convince the community college in town to start teaching Basque classes. He always thought that his goal in America was to try to preserve Basque culture. But when he won the NEA award in Washington for Basque improvisational poetry, or Bert Solari, he realized that in his own country, he wasn't allowed to say he was Basque. But in America, he could be proud to be Basque. The Basque culture in America, he realized, is so much stronger than it is in either Spain or France. In 1969, not long after he moved to America, to Martin's surprise, there was a contest for Bert Solari in Carson City, Nevada. The 1970 contest was canceled due to lack of participation, and so, by 1971, Martin had finally worked up the courage to attend his first contest in America. He was very nervous, but after being up on that stage, Martin remembered how much he loved this art. At each Bert Solari contest, you have no idea what topic you are going to have to sing about until you are already there on the stage. Sometimes the competition is solo, and sometimes with another person, in which you share a mic and respond back and forth about the topic. Martin says, the key to good Bert Solari is making lots of jokes. Most of the time, Bert Solari is very humorous, but it can also be performed at weddings and funerals, so they try to be more sentimental. From then on, he couldn't wait to compete again. He would get up in the middle of the night and read Basque poetry books and listen to videos and songs he had recorded. His obsession led him to become one of the most respected Basque singers in the region. Before he knew it, he was the reigning champion for Bert Solari for 16 years. The Basque language is the oldest in Europe. It could be compared to the Native American languages we have in the States. Many cultures, Russians, Chinese, Cubans, and more, have all had very similar art forms to Bert Solari, but they had died out over the years. For the Basque, Bert Solari is stronger now more than ever. At the final contest a few years ago, Martin said there must have been at least 15,000 people in the stadium watching. That's how much the culture in America has grown. One of Martin's greatest passions is preserving the Basque language. In 1998, he got involved in the North American Basque Association, otherwise known as the NAVO. Many members of the organization felt very strongly about preserving Basque sports and dancing, but Martin spoke to the group at the convention and said, "We need to really think seriously about preserving the Basque language." When nobody listened, he stood up at the next year's meeting and the next year's meeting. To get their attention, he donated $500 to the organization specifically for the preservation of the Basque language, and then several others at the meeting matched his donation. Suddenly, he found himself as the new chairman for the preservation of the Basque language. The following day, he was invited to breakfast with leaders from the Basque government. They wanted him to know that he had their support. At the time, there was a computer program set up by the Basque government to teach Basque, known as HABE, and Martin convinced them to have courses in English so that the Basque community in America could also study Basque, a project that would cost the government around $60,000. But they went through with it because they could see Martin's passion. Today, there are over 16 institutions, including community colleges and universities, where you can study Basque, and none of these programs existed before Martin advocated for them in the early 2000s. Martin believes that the art of Bert Solari is about how much you can say with so few words. How you can take a topic as simple as fire, and in just a song, tell a story of war over the centuries. Martin once had to sing about love, and he said, "She is as beautiful as a rose, and I would like to be a thorn on that rose." In Bert Solari, you can say anything you want to say. Martin recognized the value of that and wanted others to see it too. Through his singing and his leadership in business, Martin would touch the lives of countless numbers of Basque people in America, Basque people in the state of Wyoming, and even me. The Goicoechea success story is one I never would have heard had I not stumbled across this interview or had this Wyoming history project to do. But it really has changed my perspective. I grew up with one of Martin's daughters. She was, of course, very involved in art and singing in Rock Springs, and I was in countless plays and choirs and competitions with her. Knowing that her dad worked so hard to preserve his culture in my own community has given me a newfound respect for their entire family. You often hear about the American dream success stories of your own family, but rarely get to experience the American dream stories of others' families, even if you grew up with them. Knowing that Martin Goicoechea worked his way up from a farmer in Navarra to a regional champion in art and a business leader in my hometown gives me hope for my own future. In Wyoming, people really can be whoever they want to be, and Martin's story showed me that.
This will be interesting for you. I gotta tell you, when I had the NEA award in Washington for the improvisation, poetry, make me realize in Spain, or in our own country, we can even say we're Basques. We will not even recognize us as Basques. It's our race, or what we are. It's just like if you're Indian, you're Indian, or if you're Mexican, you're Mexican, or you're black, you're black. We weren't recognized for that. In fact, one of the part of the speeches was, well, we're not recognized as Basque in Madrid or in Paris, because we're on both sides, but we are recognized as a Basque in Washington. So, it was I don't have enough good words to say how great this country is.
Yeah.
So I get emotional sometimes when you
That's okay. That's
go through the through those steps. So